Could the Rangers make a run at unrestricted free agent Tyler Toffoli? Is there any chance that Erik Gustafsson is back with the team next year? And we are wishing well to Derick Brassard, who just announced his retirement from hockey.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1097 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. So I want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So going to go ahead, continue with our off-season series. We do this every year, somewhat abbreviated this year, though, because obviously the Rangers had a deep playoff run, so less time between the end of their season and the start of unrestricted free agency. So we're going through it kind of quick here, but going to continue IDing potential UFA targets for the Rangers once free agency begins, actually 1 week from today on Monday, July 1st at noon. And in our last episode, we talked about Jonathan Marchessault. I feel like Ranger fans are kind of divided on that name, just going by the comments in the YouTube section, I can tell. But if you want my thoughts on Marchessault, you can check out the episode right before this one. But as for today, we're going to shift our attention to somebody that has been targeted by the Rangers in the past. He's been connected to them in one way or another. Rumors that the Rangers were actually looking to potentially bring him in at the trade deadline this past season, and that would be Tyler Toffoli, right winger and left winger. Turned 32 years old in April, 6 feet tall, 203 pounds. As I just mentioned, he can play either wing. With the Rangers, I certainly see him as a right winger, more specifically the top-line right winger that this team has been trying to find ever since Pavel Buchnevich was traded away. We'll talk more about that fit in just a second, but I also do want to mention that we're going to be doing a special live show. The Everydayers, you guys have heard me talk about this the last handful of episodes. Going to do a special live free agency show on July 1st, Monday, July 1st at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time. The timeline, the start of free agency begins at noon on that day. So we'll start a little early and we'll just see what happens and enjoy all the chaos together and keep our fingers crossed that the Rangers do a nice job when that happens. But as for Toffoli, again, this is somebody that the Rangers have coveted in the past, at least to a degree. Toffoli has now played for the Kings, the Canucks, the Canadiens, the Flames, the Devils, and the Jets, and somebody that's just a solid all-around player and somebody that produces a lot of offense, former Cup champion for the Los Angeles Kings. As far as his career stats, all these teams combined, 812 games, 260 goals, 261 assists, so 521 points. He's a plus 87 and also has 723 hits. And then in the playoffs, 93 games, 20 goals, 26 assists, 46 points. So his production does take a little bit of a hit offensively in the playoffs. He is a physical player, so he can bring that to the table when it comes to the postseason, but less than a half point per game, slightly under a half point per game for his career in the playoffs. And then this past season between the Devils and Jets, he was on the Devils to start the season, ended up getting traded to the Jets right around the deadline, with the Devils obviously not contending. But if you combine everything he did there, 79 games, 33 goals, 22 assists, 55 points. He was also a -6. And the season before that, he was with the Flames, 34 goals, 39 assists, and 82 games. So, overall, just, again, steady, consistent offensive production from Tyler Toffoli one season to the next. And seemingly, no matter which team he plays for, he produces. He struggled a little bit with the Jets, at least relative to the kind of numbers that he puts up or has put up on other stops throughout his career. But it does seem like, he bounces around the league quite a bit. And at first, that might kind of raise a red flag, but really it doesn't. I feel like it's just one of those situations where it's sort of worked out that way. He'll be on a non-contending team. He'll get flipped to a contending team. And, now he's going to be a free agent. So it's just the way it goes with certain players. He was on the Kings for a long time. And as I mentioned, did win the Stanley Cup with them back in 2014, of course, against the Rangers. I might as well just add that there. But that is what happened. As far as, where he stands like financially in the league and how much money has been paid to him and how much money will be paid to him going forward, he is coming off of a 4-year deal that paid him $4.25 million per season. He actually signed that deal in free agency 4 years ago with the Montreal Canadiens. He eventually was then traded to the Flames, and then he was there for 1 year, traded to the Devils before this past year. Devils didn't contend. No reason to hang on to him. Trade him to the Jets, and that's what they did. And the Jets went out in the playoffs fairly quickly, as we all know. But again, there's a lot to like here. What really stands out for me, again, is the solid, consistent offensive production. And the guy can really shoot the puck. I mentioned a second ago that we did an episode on Jonathan Marchessault where we talk about him potentially being signed by the Rangers. And we also mentioned in that episode how Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider, they seem to do well, or at least they did with Frank Vatrano being a sniper. Maybe a sniper is what they need. I mean, they can both shoot the puck too. But yeah, ever since Buchnevich was traded, you guys know the story, just a revolving door at top line right wing. They've tried about 1 million different players and nothing has ever really stuck. The guy that they had the most success with, Mika and Kreider, that is, was definitely Frank Vatrano. So I do wonder if somebody like Jonathan Marchessault, we talked about him in the last episode, or potentially Tyler Toffoli, guys that can really shoot the puck, if they might thrive in that role, and if Mika and Kreider might play up to their capabilities. And I don't want to make it sound like they had terrible seasons. They didn't, but yeah, I mean, they seem to do better when they've got, a shooter with them. And I think Tyler Toffoli could certainly fill that void. And just in general, when you look at all the different players that have played there with Mika and Kreider since Buchnevich left, I got to think that Toffoli is basically probably the best all-around player that they would play with. I mean, some people might throw out Vatrano, but, Vatrano didn't really reach that top level, that borderline elite level until this past season with the Ducks. And Toffoli, I don't know if you'd call him elite, but again, this guy is just a rock solid player and has been that way for quite some time. So as far as the role, I mean, again, top line right wing, a lot of the free agents that we're going to talk about, that's where I envision them playing, because that to me is the biggest hole when you look at this Ranger roster, this lineup. I mean, I know some people want another defenseman, or we need more physical, bottom sixers, all those things have merit. But to me, the thing that this team is sorely, sorely lacking is that, legitimate top line right winger. I'm not talking about a third liner masquerading as a top liner. Okay. We want a bona fide top line right winger, a guy that's played in the top six for a lot of his career, and a guy that can produce offensively. As far as a contract goes, I toss this out with Marchessault, but I'll do it again here with Toffoli. If the Rangers were to make a run at him, do you consider, if you're the Rangers, potentially overpaying him for just 1 year? Because if you do it that way, then his contract does not overlap with Alexis Lafreniere needing a new deal next year, with Igor Shesterkin needing a new deal next year, and Keandre Miller as well, among some other free agents for the New York Rangers. So you could go down that route. Again, just kind of to just see the lay of the land here. I do want to mention again his contract from this past year, the past 4 years, really, the past 4-year deal that Toffoli signed. His most recent contract, the one that just expired, was for 4 years, paid him $4.25 million a season. His contract before that was for 3 years at $4.6 million a year. So maybe somewhere in that vicinity gets it done. Those contracts are obviously fairly comparable. But if you want to go the 1 year route, do you just overpay and say, okay, you know what? We won't give you the longest contract, but we'll give you the most money, albeit for just 1 year. 1 year at $5.5 million, or somewhere in that vicinity. I get the feeling Toffoli would probably not do that, because guys just typically don't want to do that. I mean, there have been exceptions. We talked about that in the Marchessault episode, of guys who don't get the long-term deal that they want, so they just sign a short 1 year deal for the most possible money that they can make in one season. We have seen that at times in the past. I don't know if Toffoli would do that. I get the feeling he'd probably want a multi-year deal. If you go with a multi-year deal, do you go to $4.5 million per season for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years? If you give him 5 years, can you then bring that $4.5 million per season down to say $4 million per season? And I pitched that idea in the Marchessault episode, and I'll admit, I don't want to sign Jonathan Marchessault for 6 years. But the reason I threw out that idea is because it would be very similar to what they did with Vincent Trocheck, where you give somebody a lot of years and you lower the average annual value in so doing. And what that allows you to do is it gives you a little bit more cap space for this year, next year, really every season to follow. And you got a little bit more you can do as far as bringing in players that can help you win a Stanley Cup. And that's obviously what the Rangers are trying to do right now. The longer a contract is, the less money that you're typically going to have to pay per season. So with Toffoli, I mean, again, you can make a case either way. You can go super short, 1 year, if Toffoli's open for that. If he's not, then do you go 3 years at $5 million? Or do you go longer than that? Do you go 6 years and bring the cost down to like $4 million a season? I don't know. It's difficult to always know how this is going to go. The hockey free agent market and the trade market can always be very unpredictable. But again, here is somebody that we know that the Rangers like. They were connected to him at the trade deadline this past season. Dealing with the Devils, that probably isn't going to go your way. It's kind of the same thing with a lot of people wanting the Rangers to trade for Jake Gensel. I just felt like the Rangers and Penguins would never strike a deal like that. Now, Toffoli's not the same player that Gensel is, and isn't obviously synonymous with Devils hockey the way that Gensel basically is with the Penguins. So it's a little different. But yeah, I just was skeptical that the Rangers and Devils would shake hands on a deal like that. We've seen it in the past. Obviously, Michael Grabner was a player that got traded from the Rangers to the Devils, but that was a smaller deal, and I just didn't see it happening this way around. The nice thing now is that if you do sign Toffoli, you don't have to give up any assets because it's not a trade; it's a free agent signing. But then again, it'll be for a longer commitment than just bring him in as a rental at the trade deadline. So the conclusion here, I like Toffoli. Him and Marchessault are kind of on the same wavelength for me, in the same area. I get the feeling that Toffoli is a little bit more likely. It just feels like, looking at different hockey writers and beat writers and all that good stuff, it feels like Toffoli is the one that is being connected with the Rangers more often than Jonathan Marchessault. And there's a very good chance I think the Rangers could end up landing Toffoli once free agency starts, but we'll obviously keep our eye on that. And like I said, we get the live show coming up on Monday to look forward to as well. We might see it happen in real time here together on Locked On New York Rangers. But we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to an in-house Ranger free agent. We've been doing this throughout the entire offseason. That is going to be Erik Gustafsson. We'll talk about him and if there's any chance that he will be back with the Rangers next year. And we will do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the Stanley Cup Finals, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200. You can bet on everything from the Stanley Cup Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the ballpark and much, much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All right, we just want to thank you guys, as always, for supporting Locked On New York Rangers, the everydayers that watch or listen to this show every day. Can't thank you guys enough for that. Also want to mention, or ask you guys rather, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as I mentioned, I was shouting at the everydayers just a second ago there. Going forward this week, big week. We're leading into the NHL draft, and then we've got free agency right after that. We're going to be talking quite a bit more about the NHL draft. There are also rumors circulating right now, and they just started really today before I hit record here. At least that's when I saw it, that the Rangers might be looking to package Capo Caco along with the number 30 overall draft pick and move up in the draft to pick a little bit earlier in the first round. We'll talk about that. And we'll continue to look at, free agents from around the league, guys that the Rangers might be interested in, personal favorites of mine, whatever it might be. We'll see how that goes. But definitely a big week here on Locked On Rangers. And if you're a Ranger fan, buckle up because it's going to get kind of crazy here with the draft and free agency basically back to back. So I do want to shift our attention to an in-house Ranger free agent. We're doing this throughout the entire offseason. We've covered a bunch of guys already, Rosovic and Wenberg. And then you have the RFAs, Capo Caco already re-signed, Braden Schneider, Ryan Lindgren. Today, it's Erik Gustafsson's turn. We're going to put him on trial, give him a fair trial, as they say, and talk about if there's any chance that he will be back with the Rangers this upcoming season. I'll say right off the bat here, I think he probably walks. A lot of guys that were brought in by the Rangers this past offseason before the season started in free agency, they were guys that were signing one-year deals for six figures at or near the league minimum. And usually when you do that, all those players are gonna walk at the end of the season. I mean, guys like Nick Bonino and Tyler Pitlick didn't even make it through the season. They were eventually waived, and the Rangers and Bonino eventually came to an agreement and let him just leave the organization. Tyler Pitlick finished out with the Hartford Wolfpack, but those guys, I mean, they're long gone. They're not coming back. And then you've got trade deadline rentals like Roslovic and Wenberg and Ruedel. And usually these guys that are brought in for these kinds of situations, they tend to walk in free agency. I think that's probably the case with just about every Ranger UFA, and I think it's certainly the case with Erik Gustafsson as well. I don't think he was nearly as bad as certain Ranger fans would have you believe. I mean, there were times where he was a little bit shaky and times where maybe he turned the puck over. Not maybe the most physical defenseman in the world, but I think as far as all around game goes, from guys that are basically your number 6 defenseman, I thought he did fine this year. We know that he got off to a really hot start with his new team because, I mean, to begin with, he just started very well. But then Adam Fox had the injury and he goes down, and oh my God, what are we going to do? And Erik Gustafsson steps up, was getting a lot more ice time at that point in the season, stepped up on the power play. He was quarterbacking the Ranger top power play unit and looked like they never missed a beat. So that was awesome. At times during this, probably like about the first quarter of the season or so, I was saying that I think Erik Gustafsson might be the steal of free agency when you consider that they only signed him for 1 year and $800K. And I believe the league minimum last year was $750K. So yeah, I mean, he was barely over that at all. And the offensive numbers are good, especially for a defenseman. 6 goals, 25 assists, 31 points. He was also a +3. Average 1724 per night, 66 block shots, 63 hits. I will say this, though, because there's some people that just weren't feeling Erik Gustafsson, especially by the end of the season and certainly into the playoffs as well. You could make the argument that Erik Gustafsson, he's got these offensive skills and he's known as an offensive defenseman, and that's all well and good and everything. You could make the argument, though, that that's not really what you need from your 6th defenseman. Your 6th defenseman, maybe for some people, is somebody that's kind of a stay-at-home type and maybe a little bit more physical, a little bit bigger, somebody that doesn't necessarily jump off the screen in a good way, but also doesn't jump off the screen in a bad way. Somebody that just doesn't make a lot of mistakes. As I'm saying all this, I'm kind of like thinking of Chad Ruedel, who is an impending UFA. I feel like the Rangers, it would make some sense to maybe bring him back in a 7th defenseman role at or near the league minimum. But, as I say all these things about Erik Gustafsson, again, I do think he'll walk in free agency, but if he does, he will very likely be replaced in the opening night lineup by Zac Jones, who is somewhat similar to Erik Gustafsson in the fact that they are both known as like kind of offense first defensemen. Now, Jones, of course, this past year, I think played the best hockey that he ever has. He played in 31 games, which almost doubles his previous career high of 16. And, I think it's time for Zac Jones to get a fair shake, which is kind of what I'm getting at here. And that's another reason why I'm completely fine with letting Erik Gustafsson walk in free agency. If he wanted to come back at like 1 year and like 825 or 850K a year, I don't really see any issue with that. But like I just mentioned, I think it's time for Zac Jones to get some rope, get some leeway, put him out there on opening night. He's the number 6 defenseman until somebody eclipses him or until he shows that he can't get the job done, because Zac Jones, again, did play very well this past season. I know a lot of people were clamoring for him in free agency. And the other thing that, really works against the Rangers bringing back Erik Gustafsson is the fact that I think, he's probably going to get a little bit of a pay raise. Again, he was like barely over the league minimum when the Rangers brought him in, but due to his offensive numbers and due to the fact that he played very well at the start of the season, I think you're going to see Gustafsson probably end up with, at least a 2-year deal. It feels like he signs 1-year deal after 1-year deal after 1-year deal. And you can see why. Obviously, there's some inconsistency in his game, but I feel like he showed enough this past year where Gustafsson could probably get himself, a 2-year deal worth $2 million a season. I mean, does that sound about right? And, you look at a price like that, if you're the Rangers, and at first glance, it's like, yeah, that's not that high. Maybe they could bring him back for about that price. But again, I don't see them doing it. I think they like Zac Jones. I think they're going to give him a chance. And I don't think that they want any money being given to Erik Gustafsson to prevent them from, or at least, hinder their ability to give new contracts to guys like Igor Shesterkin or, all the people that I keep mentioning. Alexi Lafreniere is getting a new contract after this season, and so too will Andre Miller if he's still around. And, again, Gustafsson, total journeyman. He's bounced around 8 teams in 5 years, which doesn't even seem possible, but it is a fact. Again, I thought he did overall, a solid job this year from somebody that's a number 6 defenseman. There were certainly some hiccups at times, but I think we're in a situation now where the Rangers are probably ready to give the reins to Zac Jones as the number 6 defenseman. And on top of that, Erik Gustafsson is not going to break the bank in free agency the way that other guys do, but I think he'll get enough where the Rangers just kind of say, no, it's fine. We'll let him walk and we'll move on from there. And I think Jones is your number 6 defenseman. And I think either Chad Ruhwedel could be your number 7 if you bring him back. And if not, you get somebody comparable, somebody with that same kind of skill set as Chad Ruhwedel. And there's your number 7 defenseman going into next year. But I just don't think Gustafsson is part of the Ranger plans. We'll see. Never say never. I'd give him more of a chance of being back than probably like Rosovic or Wenberg or Wheeler. But even still, I really don't see it happening. It seems like kind of a long shot. So Gustafsson, more likely than not, going to be on his way in free agency. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to Derick Brassard, one of my personal favorite Rangers. The everydayers know that. I was a big Brassard fan for many, many years. He was only with the Rangers for 4 years, but obviously made an impact and was part of a lot of really good teams. We're going to talk about him announcing his retirement and some big moments that he had as a member of the Rangers in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Policygenius. A lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family quick and easy. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. Their award-winning agents can even walk you through the process step by step. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That is policygenius.com. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. One of my all-time favorites, Derick Brassard. He's on my certainly my Mount Rushmore of favorite Rangers ever. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll do that. I'll write my top 10 favorite Rangers, and here's some of your guys' lists as well. That could be a fun episode deep into the offseason, most likely. But for today, yeah, let's just talk about Brassard. You guys know, again, he's one of my all-time favorites, and just loved his compete level, loved the fire that he played with. Seemed like he always stepped up big in big games, certainly in the playoffs. 59 Stanley Cup playoff games with the New York Rangers, 18 goals, 26 assists, so 44 points in 59 playoff games. He was also a plus 13 in the postseason with the Rangers, and just a great Ranger. You know, again, it's one of those guys, it felt like he was here for maybe a little bit longer than he actually was. He was only here for 4 years, came over to the Rangers in the trade that sent Marian Gaborik to the Columbus Blue Jackets. That occurred on April 3rd, 2013, during trade deadline season. And in exchange for Gaborik, the Rangers got not only Brassard, but also Derek Dorsett, John Moore, and a 6th-round draft pick. And all 3 of those players, Brassard, Dorsett, and Moore, all 3 of them had a hand in the Rangers making it to the Stanley Cup final the following season in 2013-2014, but obviously none more so than Derick Brassard. We also know that once it was all said and done with the Rangers, you know, the trade kind of happened out of nowhere, but, you know, when you look at it, it's not super surprising. They traded Derick Brassard to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Mika Zibanejad. And I always felt, you know, looking back now especially, that trade, this sent Brassard to Ottawa in exchange for Mika, it was kind of the precursor of the rebuild of the letter going out, because the Rangers weren't ready to tear it all down at that point. But it wasn't long after that. It was the season after that, Mika Zibanejad's first season with the Rangers, where things didn't go well, and then the letter went out, and they basically said, okay, we're going to rebuild, because that was the first move the Rangers made that kind of had an eye on the future. When that trade was made, you know, Derick Brassard was the superior of the 2 players, but he was also 5 years younger, or Mika was 5 years younger, and it wasn't going to be long before, you know, their careers started to kind of go in different directions, and of course, that's exactly what happened. And look, I know there's a lot of people that are upset, mad at Mika Zibanejad right now after, you know, the playoffs and everything, but you can't look at that trade and say it was anything other than a wild success for the New York Rangers, because, again, Brassard just never really got back to the same level that he was at with the Rangers. His career high in points from that moment on for a single season, was 39 points. He did that with the Senators his first year there. And obviously, I mean, after that, he bounced around to just about every single player or every single team in the NHL. You know, he starts his career with the Jackets, goes to the Rangers for 4 years, traded to the Senators in exchange for Mika Zibanejad. And then from there, Penguins, Panthers, Avalanche, Islanders, Coyotes, Flyers, Oilers, and Senators again. And that was the last season of his career. Not this season that just ended, but the one before that. He was actually out of hockey for this past season. So Yeah, he played for just about everybody. If you're playing Immaculate Grid today, keep Derick Brassard in mind. He's kind of a free space when it comes to that game. But yeah, I mean, and Mika Zibanejad, look, there's people that are upset about him. He's basically, after the first 2 years with the Rangers, basically been a point per game player, not to mention all the work that he does defensively, all the work that he does on the penalty kill. He's been a heck of a player for the Rangers, has Mika Zibanejad, and that's a trade that the Rangers obviously won, and one that continues to benefit them to this day. As far as Brassard and his entire career, 10 different teams, as I just mentioned, we just went through the entire gauntlet there. 1,013 regular season games for Brassard, 215 goals, 330 assists, so 545 points, and then another 118 playoff games, 25 goals, 43 assists, 68 points. His only trip to the finals was in 2014 with the Rangers. Obviously, he never won the big one, never won the Stanley Cup. But he got back to the conference final a handful of times after that. 2015 also with the Rangers, 2017 with the Senators. So look at that. 3 conference final appearances in 4 seasons for Derick Brassard. Not too shabby. And then one more time in 2020 with the Islanders. And that was the year, it was the COVID year, and they didn't call it the conference final. It was, the semifinals or whatever. Bottom line, he got to the round of 4. So he, was no stranger to making deep playoff runs. And it's a shame that, he never did end up lifting the Stanley Cup. But, I always held out hope that he might eventually make his way back to the Rangers. I'd kind of given up on it, last year and the season before, and maybe even the season before that. But the reason when we started Locked On Rangers here, why I kept saying, Derick Brassard might be a good signing. He was a free agent, just kind of sitting out there, nobody really going after him. And, eventually he signed. I don't even remember who he signed with that year, but I kept saying, early in the days of Locked On New York Rangers, I think they should bring him back. And at the time, and probably even now, you might hear that and think like, well, the Rangers are rebuilding. Why would they bring in a veteran, a guy that's getting into his 30s now? I get that, but I always just felt like, you need a couple of veterans in that room. You can't have an entire roster of guys that are 23 or younger. And Brassard had obviously been there and done that and been to the Cup Finals with the Rangers. And I think, him centering one of the bottom 6 lines would have made some sense at that time for the Rangers. Obviously, it never happened. I never got my wish. But all the best to Derick Brassard in his retirement. Like I said, he was one of my all-time favorites. And I will say it is sad to see all these players from the 2014 conference champion team start to retire, start to call it a career. I mean, there were some veterans on that team too in 2014. And at the time, you knew that guys like Marty St. Louis and Brad Richards, they were getting toward the end of their career, certainly closer to the end of their career than the start of it. Rick Nash was another one. He wasn't super old, but he had to retire early due to obviously some concussion issues. But now, I mean, you're seeing the last, couple of off seasons here and this off season, guys on that team who weren't even old. They were like in their mid 20s and they're now retiring. Guys like Carl Hagelin last off season, he had the eye injury. Otherwise, I think he probably could have at least gone a couple more years. But yeah, Hagelin retires. Derek Stepan retires. Now Derick Brassard retires. Brian Boyle, I don't remember exactly when, but that had to be within the last year or two. He retired. By that same token, though, there are still some guys from that 2014 team that are still kicking around and in some cases playing very good hockey. Chris Kreider is one of them. Matt Zuccarello is another. Ryan McDonough, he's had a very lengthy career. And for somebody that plays, some blue-collar, hard-nosed hockey, I think he's still doing pretty well for himself. He's going to be back in Tampa this upcoming year. Mark Stahl's still out there. JT Miller has become a superstar. He didn't play a ton of games in 2014 with the Rangers, but he was on the way. And Jesper Foss, he didn't play a ton of games for that team either, but he's still around and he's become a solid player. So, yeah, again, it's just kind of bittersweet seeing these 2014 Rangers hang them up here after going to the Stanley. Doesn't feel like 10 years ago, but yeah, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals a decade ago. As far as Brassard, like some of my favorite memories, I mean, I think of the big playoff performances. That's kind of where my mind tends to go anytime I'm thinking about somebody's career highlights. But he used to just own the Penguins in the playoffs, which is awesome. By my count, I tallied this up pretty quick today, but it looks like 13 points in 17 playoff games against the Pittsburgh Penguins. When the Rangers were down 3-1 in the best of 7 in 2014 against Pittsburgh, that's when Brassard came up big in Game 5 on the road. Kind of a forgotten clutch performance, but Brassard in that game scored 2 goals and had an assist. So that obviously helped the Rangers beat the Penguins in Game 5. They beat them in Game 6. That was the Marty St. Louis Mother's Day goal game. And then Game 7, just a dramatic game in Pittsburgh. So Brassard was instrumental in helping the Rangers turn that series around. And another big one, and this one's kind of bittersweet because it led to just a disaster of a Game 7. But the Rangers, the year after that in 2015, down 3-2 on the road against Tampa. And Derick Brassard has a hat trick and 2 assists, just absolutely put the team on his back and just crushed the Lightning on that night. Unfortunately, a couple of nights later, Game 7 in the Garden, Rangers get shut out, and they get eliminated. So a bit of a bittersweet one there. But yeah, you talk about coming up clutch in a big way. Derick Brassard in Game 6 against Tampa doesn't get much bigger than that. So yeah, again, all the best to Derick Brassard. Like I said, a personal favorite of mine. I'd given up on him coming back to the Rangers in recent seasons, but again, still a heck of a career and a heck of a player, and obviously a big part of some really deep playoff runs for the New York Rangers. Figure we can call it there. Obviously, it's Monday as I'm recording this. Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final is tonight. The Oilers have come all the way back. That series is now 3-3. Can't wait to watch that. I mean, Game 7 of any series, I mean, hey, just put me in front of the TV and I'll enjoy it. Unless it's the Rangers. I don't really enjoy that because that's just very stressful. But yeah, it's always exciting, and this is for all the marbles tonight, and we'll see what happens. There's that. I already mentioned the NHL draft. Round 1 is going to be this Friday night. The rest of the draft will be on Saturday. We'll have some episodes recapping what the Rangers do in the draft. And of course, free agency on Monday. I've mentioned it several times. Going to do a live show for that. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well at LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's at LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.